Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. For the record, it is 12 noon on September 6th, 2023. We are at the Department of Environmental Services office at 29 Hazen Drive in Concord, New Hampshire, for a public hearing on Waste Management of New Hampshire's application for a significant modification to its Title V operating permit for the Turnkey Recycling and Environmental Enterprises Municipal Solid Waste Landfill in Rochester, New Hampshire. My name is Michael Fitzgerald. I serve as Assistant Director of the Air Division here at DES, and I have been appointed by Craig Wright, Director of the Air Division, to serve as the hearing officer for today's hearing. Other key DES staff with us here today include Sheila Rydell, Environmental Program Manager, Barbara Dorfschmidt, Operating Permits Program Manager, and Todd Moore, Air Permit Programs Manager. We also have other DES staff available to assist with answering questions and helping to run the hearing. Some are online, some are available here. We're also providing public access to the hearing via the web through the virtual meeting software. All participating DES staff are present or have the ability to communicate during this meeting through the web platform, and the public is welcome to attend in person or has access to contemporaneously listen and, if necessary, participate in this meeting. The meeting link is posted on the DES website, and is it up on the?
It's at the bottom. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't think reading the link will be of any value since it's about page wide here. So, if anyone experiences a problem with access to the hearing, please call Meg King at 603-271-7669, or you can email Meg at margaret.m.king@des.nh.gov. This hearing will be conducted in accordance with New Hampshire Code of Administrative Rules, ENVA 200 and ENVC 200. As required by these rules, the proceedings of this hearing are being recorded, and all who speak will be required to state for the record their name, the town, and the name of the party they represent, if applicable, at this hearing. This hearing is being recorded and will be posted on the DES website. The purpose of this hearing is to provide information on the draft Title V operating permit and to receive public comments. Notice of the hearing was published on July 26, 2023 in both Manchester Union Leader and Foster's Daily Democrat. The notice indicated that DES would accept comments on the draft permit until Wednesday, September 13th, 2023, 1 week from today. The process for this hearing will be as follows. First, Sheila Rydell will provide a brief presentation on the draft modification of the Title V operating permit. Once Ms. Rydell has finished, we'll see if anyone has clarifying questions on the draft permit. We would ask that you hold questions until she finishes. And again, distinguish, if you have clarifying questions regarding the presentation, we'll try to address those. But that's separate from your public comments, the public testimony. If we're not able to answer the questions, we'll indicate so. We'll then proceed to the public testimony portion of the hearing. First, we'll request any interested persons in attendance to provide oral testimony. After their testimony is heard, Barbara Dorfschmidt will provide a brief overview on how to provide oral testimony using the virtual meeting software for those attendees on the web. Each person will have a 5-minute maximum. After 5 minutes, we'll give you a friendly reminder. Questions will be addressed by DES to the extent possible during the public hearing. However, the purpose of the hearing is to solicit and receive comments. DES will address comments in our final decision. Once everyone who cares to testify has done so, I will then close the public hearing. If there are any questions about how we're going to proceed, Barbara can briefly go over how to do that. So do we have any questions on how we're going to proceed?
If anybody online has a question, all they have to do is hit the raise your hand button on the toolbar at the top. I will then unmute you, but you may also have to unmute yourself. So pay attention to whether or not your microphone has a little slash through it or not. So if anybody online has a question about how we are going to proceed with the hearing, they can raise their hand. It's no hands being raised.
All right. Good. So then we'll begin with the presentation by Sheila. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Sheila Rydell, and I'm a permitting engineer with the Department of Environmental Services Air Resources Division. I'm here today to give a presentation on a draft Title V operating permit for waste management of New Hampshire's Turnkey Recycling and Environmental Enterprises facility. Turnkey operates a municipal solid waste landfill located in Rochester, New Hampshire. The facility is currently operating under Title V operating permit TV-0062, which covers the existing landfill through phase 14. It includes requirements for all existing combustion devices. There are 2 landfill gas-fired turbines, 4 landfill gas-fired engines, 3 flares, 3 emergency generators, 1 boiler, and there's also 1 paint spray booth that is used to paint dumpsters. Facility is also operating under temporary permit TP-0268, which authorized the construction of a landfill expansion phases 15 through 17. And finally, the facility is operating under temporary permit TP-0297, which authorized the installation of an emergency fire pump engine. Turnkey submitted a permit application for a significant modification request on December 27th, 2022. This project or application is consolidating previously approved projects and permits and updating regulatory requirements into the Title V permit. The application requested that we incorporate the requirements of TP-0268 into the Title V permit. Turnkey commenced construction of the landfill expansion on July 8th, 2022, and this triggered the applicability of 40 CFR Subpart XXX or XXX, which applies to municipal solid waste landfills that commence construction, reconstruction, or modification after July 17th, 2014. And I'll refer to this as Subpart XXX. The application also requested that we incorporate the requirements of TP-0297 for the installation of a fire pump engine. The application also requested that we update references to and applicable requirements of Subpart XXX and 40 CFR 63 Subpart 4A, which also applies to municipal solid waste landfills. And that was due to federal regulatory updates that became effective on September 27th, 2021. Lastly, the application requested that we remove an auxiliary emergency generator from the permit, and this was because it meets the definition of a non-road engine, and it does not require to be included in the permit. We conducted a technical and engineering review of the application. Temporary permits may be incorporated into the Title V operating permit via a minor modification, which does not require a public notice period. Due to the federal regulatory updates, some of which could be interpreted as being less stringent, the application was processed as a significant modification. And I'll get into more detail about the regulatory updates a little later. Our review concluded that Turnkey can comply with all applicable state and federal air pollution control requirements, and we prepared a draft Title V operating permit for public comment, and that was issued on May 12th, 2023. During the public comment period, we did receive a request to hold a public hearing, and that is what we're doing today on September 6th. So as I mentioned, there have been a number of updates to subparts XXX and subpart 4A. And I just wanted to review some of those updates.
Sheila, just to be clear, these are federal standards, not state specific federal standards that were triggered at the application.
Right, right. So owners and operators are required to operate landfill gas collection wellheads to maintain landfill gas temperature at less than 145 degrees Fahrenheit. The prior requirement was to operate them at less than 131 degrees Fahrenheit. EPA made this change to reduce the number of requests they were receiving for higher operating values, and also to provide more flexibility to owners and operators of landfills for their wellhead operations. Nitrogen and oxygen operational limitations for landfill gas collection wellheads have been removed. Monitoring for these parameters is still required. EPA concluded that nitrogen and oxygen by themselves are not effective indicators of proper operation of landfill gas collection systems. And they also don't indicate whether there are excess emissions occurring. The last notable change is that the provisions of subpart XXX and subpart 4A apply at all times. Previously, the rules allowed for some exceptions during periods of startup, shutdown, and malfunction, and these have been removed. Work practice standards apply during startup, shutdown, and malfunction events. There are also some changes to monitoring and testing requirements. One of the new requirements is that corrective actions for a wellhead positive pressure and elevated temperature have been revised to require root cause analysis if corrective actions cannot be completed within 60 days. There are also new enhanced monitoring provisions that have been included for wellheads with measured landfill gas above 145 degrees Fahrenheit. There are record keeping and reporting revisions also. In terms of record keeping, the requirements to have a startup, shutdown, and malfunction plan has been removed since the requirements of subpart XXX and subpart 4A apply at all times. There are also reporting requirement revisions. Semi-annual reporting for landfills have been updated to reflect changes in the monitoring requirements. Immediate, periodic, and immediate startup, shutdown, and malfunction reports are no longer applicable. And there are two new reports. There's a 24-hour high temperature report and also a corrective action report that has been included. The close of the comment period will be next Wednesday, September 13th at 4 p.m. The applicant may request a copy of all written comments and provide any additional comments. New Hampshire DES will review all the comments and decide to issue as drafted or amended or to deny a proposed Title V operating permit within 30 working days. The applicant and the public may appeal the director's final decision to the New Hampshire Air Resources Council within 30 days after issuance of the final decision. If the director's decision is to issue a proposed Title V permit, EPA has 45 days to review the proposed permit. If EPA does not object to the issuance of the Title V permit, New Hampshire DES will then proceed to issuing a final Title V permit. Any interested party has 60 days after the end of EPA's 45-day review period to file a citizen's petition. This is the end of my presentation, but we did receive several questions prior to today's meeting that we thought would be worthwhile to talk about. Okay, we did. There were more than 2 questions that were submitted, but we thought we would respond to these 2 during today's meeting. So one question was, how is compliance with the methane concentration standard of less than 500 ppm above background at the surface of the landfill determined? And the second question was about landfill gas generation rates. So we'll talk about the surface methane standard first. So compliance with this surface methane standard is determined using surface emissions monitoring. This is detailed in table 6, item 19 of the draft permit, and the requirements are specified in subpart 4A. Surface emission monitoring is conducted quarterly, and it's typically the landfill is basically walked in a serpentine pattern with a handheld instrument measuring methane. All penetrations through the landfill cover are also monitored, and if the people conducting the monitoring observe see any visual observations of distressed vegetation, cracks or seeps in the cover, then those locations would also be monitored. And this monitoring, DES is present during that monitoring. DES has its own monitor, and then the landfill operator also is out there conducting the monitoring. So it's kind of a side-by-side monitoring event. There are a number of instruments that can be used to do the monitoring, but they all must meet the specifications of EPA Method 21, Section 6. During surface emissions monitoring, there's also a requirement to determine the background methane concentration standard, or it's not a standard, but the background methane concentration. And that is done by collecting samples or measuring the concentration of methane, both upwind and downwind of the outside boundary of the landfill, and at least 30 meters from the farthest perimeter well. Okay, so a monitored exceedance of the surface methane standard is a methane concentration that is greater than or equal to 500 ppm above the background. So what happens if there is a surface emission monitoring exceedance? Provided the following actions are taken, the monitored exceedance is not a violation of the operational and emission limit in the permit. So the facility needs to identify the location of the exceedance and then implement corrective actions. And these could include cover maintenance or increasing the landfill gas collection. Then at 10 days, they need to go out and remonitor that location. If the concentration is still above 500 ppm, the facility will need to take additional corrective actions, and you might remonitor at day 20. If the concentration is less than 500 ppm, then they need to remonitor at 1 month. And if 3 exceedances occur at any one location, the facility is required to install a new gas collection well or other collection device within 120 days. This is an example tracking sheet. So the facility needs to come up with a unique exceedance number identifier and record the survey coordinates in latitude and longitude, and that allows them to make sure that when they go back to remonitor, they're in the right location. They'll describe the methane, they'll just make a description of the methane exceedance location, and then you record the scan results, the date and time, corrective actions taken, and then the rescan results. The second question was regarding landfill gas generation rates. Landfill gas generation rates are predicted using LandGem, which is a model developed by EPA. Landfill gas generation rates are dependent upon the amount of waste that's accepted, the methane generation potential of the waste, which is LO, and a rate constant K, which is indicative of how quickly the gas is generated. Projected landfill gas generation rates are reviewed annually to ensure there's adequate capacity to combust all the collected landfill gas. So those were the questions we wanted to review, and I'll turn it back to Mike.
Thank you very much, Sheila. So at this point, I'd like to know if there's any clarifying questions on this presentation. Again, this is not your opportunity to give oral testimony, but if there's something that wasn't understood in the presentation and you have a question, see if we can possibly answer that. I'll take questions here in the room first, and then Barbara will, if you have a question regarding the presentation, you can use the raise hand function, and Barbara will moderate those for us after we address the questions here in the room. So, yes, John.
John Tydell Lackworth. Just an acronym, I may have missed it. Can you explain what SSM refers to in the plan?
It's startup, shutdown, and malfunction.
Thank you.
Yes.
Katie LaJoy, Charlestown. You mentioned that the applicant can comment on the comments that you receive. The public have access, I assume, to the comments from the applicant?
Yes, that would all be part of the public record. If they chose to do something, they don't have to. Because the only caveat to that would be if for some reason they wanted business confidential information to be part of their response, similar to when somebody submits an application, they can claim something as business confidential. And our typical procedure is to, if it's claimed, we'll set it aside. If somebody asks, then it would have to go through a legal review to see if it actually meets the criteria such that it can be allowed to be withheld. But I'm not aware of anything like that in this permanent action.
There would be public record of that confidentiality claim.
I believe there's a note in the file, like if someone from the public were to review the file, there would be a note saying that there is something else associated with this file, but it's held as confidential. So that could be the trigger for someone to request a more formal determination on
That would be found in the print record in these offices.
Yes. Yes.
Cornelius Sergeant.
Go back to John again.
A few questions on the methane. Just generally speaking, do you know what normal background would be for methane?
I did look at one report from February, and the background concentration was about 2.5 ppm.
Following up on that, I'm wondering what PFAS has calculated a basis for believing that adequate confidence level and quarterly monitoring.
I don't understand the question.
Yeah, I just wonder what the basis is for determining that quarterly monitoring is sufficient.
That's, yeah.
I think this is a great example of what we're doing in this permitting action and in many permitting actions in general. Sheila's mentioned that there are some federal regulations, Subpart XXX, Quad A, all that. The quarterly monitoring is dictated by that federal regulation. We didn't, come up with, well, should it be once a year, 4 times a year? What we've done is saying we've determined that that facility, that regulation applies to that facility. That regulation requires quarterly monitoring. So that's what goes into the permit. So that's as far as why it's 4 times a year and not 1 or twice. You'd have to go back to the federal regulation and how that was developed.
Yes, go ahead. Yes.
Wondering about weather conditions on those periodic monitoring sessions. That taken into account wind velocity, humidity?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Tony Kaplan, Medical. Following up on that question, you have, background concentrations, you have parts per million on the ground, just gas, methane. Does that go into your calculation of fugitive emissions? I assume that presence of methane is not being like that.
Right. They do report their fugitive emissions.
You have a calculation. How much that fails?
I mean, we have their annual reports. I don't know what those are.
Follow-up question about me.
Sure.
Are you, does the Title V process require you to monitor fugitive emissions?
That's what the surface emissions monitoring is doing. Yeah. One more.
Yes. Yes.
Cornelia Sargent, Claremont. Just to follow up on the monitoring of methane. Is that done by Turnkey or done by DES? And is it done in advance with notice, or is it a surprise, unannounced, unknown date?
It's
Like
it is. Both are doing it. So Turnkey is doing it, and also DES. We go out at the same time. It's not a surprise.
It's arranged.
It's usually arranged in advance, but we can go out at any time and do our own monitoring. But it's something that takes days to do.
There are people online that have questions, Mike.
Okay. Are there any further questions here in the room? So, yes, let's go ahead, Barbara.
Call you in the order that you raised your hand. So first up is Jackie Elliott, and it looks like you are self-muted, Miss Elliott. So
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for taking my question. Jackie Elliott, Waterboro, Maine. I'm wondering if you could give some clarification and explanation as to what the difference in the regulation is now around the startup, shutdown, and malfunction part of the permit.
I think the one change is, they need to shut down the gas moving equipment and all vents within 1 hour, and they need to make repairs as expeditiously as possible to keep downtime to a minimum.
All right, so if I'm understanding correctly, if I may follow up, it's not that regulation has increased in terms of what emissions are involved, but rather a matter of record keeping and reporting.
Response. How they respond to the malfunction.
So we're not talking about increased measurement in any way of what is actually being emitted during those times. It's sort of like a bookkeeping function.
Well, there is a requirement that they need to make repairs as expeditiously as possible.
Right, but that doesn't reflect actually what's being emitted. Okay, thank you.
Next up is Cynthia Walter. And it looks like you are self-muted. So you have to unmute yourself.
Walter, if you're trying to speak, you're muted. Can you unmute yourself?
Okay. I just found the right correct button.
Okay.
Thank you. Cynthia Walter, Dover. regarding the collection of samples for these quarterly testing routines. The FID, for example, is capable of measuring much more than just methane. Is only methane measured and reported, or are other substances also measured?
Well, DES's instrument is an FID. That is what we are using when we're out monitoring. But it is a surface methane standard, so that's what you're comparing the results to.
Follow up here. So the answer is you're only looking at methane. Both the DES and Turnkey are only looking for methane, even though they could look for a lot more other substances. But the federal regulations only require methane, so you're staying with methane. Is that correct?
During those surface emission monitoring events, that's correct. We do have requirements for landfill gas sampling that does analyze for a whole suite of VOCs, and that's performed, I think, once a year.
Next up is R. Winchester.
Yeah, hi, I'm Rob Winchester from Dover. I just had a question about when you do the testing process and a methane exceedance occurs, is that information publicly available? Can we look back at however many years of records of how these are done and when they occur?
Yes, those are public records.
Okay, great, thank you.
Next up is John Swann.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for taking my question. I'm wondering, considering the fact that in August of 2023, the EPA has just announced its National Enforcement and Compliance Initiatives for 2024 to 2027 to address PFAS contamination. And one of those initiatives is addressing exposure to PFAS, including industrial parties who significantly contribute to the release of PFAS into the environment, including contamination in our air. And also in that initiative includes the need to properly identify and characterize this contamination to address the larger environmental threat. So my question is, has New Hampshire DES Air Division or Waste Management, has any testing or monitoring been done relative to PFAS emissions from the landfill, including flaring? And if not, is that on the radar? And shouldn't DES Air start to take that into consideration? Thank you.
Is the meeting?
We appear to have lost connection. We're working on getting it back. How are we doing here for sound?
Hello, can folks on the computer hear us now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, my apologies. And we had technical problems here at the DES office and we dropped out. Lost one of our computers and the backup didn't kick in. So at the time that we lost you, I believe John Swann was asking questions regarding the potential for testing for PFAS, testing and monitoring for PFAS emissions from the landfill. Mr. Swann, did you want to clarify that any further?
No, it sounds like you picked up the gist of my question. Thank you.
Yes.
I think I'll respond to that. So in the context of the permitting action that this hearing is for, there are no PFAS requirements. Like you talked about initiatives, and I think we're all aware that on many levels, state and national, there's a lot of action on PFAS, both investigation and development of standards. When it comes to the point when those investigations maybe result in a standard that gets put into an air regulation that my permitting group implements, then those would be absorbed into permits. At present, we did not identify any regulations currently targeting PFAS, and I don't think you'll find any in this permit.
So, Mr. Swann, you correctly identified that EPA had included this in their enforcement program initiatives, and so obviously we would expect that further information from EPA on why they included that and how they expect us to address that. But it's certainly an area that we would take under consideration for future evaluation. So,
Yeah, Mr. Swann still has his hand up.
May I have a follow-up?
yes, go ahead.
Has any testing been conducted at the facility for PFAS emissions in the past or recently?
I'm not familiar with whether and what PFAS testing has been done at this facility. I would suggest first stop checking out DES's PFAS website. I think a lot of the information that has been gathered over the years is available there. And if there's not specifics on this facility, there's some contact people who are kind of more leading the charge on the investigation for PFAS might be able to help. But there are no requirements in this permit to test for PFAS or control its emissions.
Mr. Swann, we'll certainly take that under consideration. And again, we may not have the answer right now, but we would try to speak to the other divisions and see if there's been any activity surrounding PFAS emissions testing.
And there are no other people online with their hands raised, just double check before we get into the testimony portion.
Anyone else online have a question for us regarding the presentation, clarifying question?
Oh, we got hand raised, Brian Spargo.
Sure. Brian Spargo in Dover. I joined a little bit late, so things might have been covered that I'm asking about, but really wondering, where is the air quality testing being done? Is it only local to the Turnkey facility, or are you testing in localities around the area, certain radiuses?
It's performed on the Turnkey facility. We do surface emissions monitoring testing, and then there's testing of the turbines and the engines and the landfill gas. But it is specific to the Turnkey site.
Okay, so there's no data being gathered on what the effects are of the emissions as far as like the burn off in towns, say like in a 5-mile radius, 10-mile radius. I only ask because we smell it a lot, you know, in the night or early morning. So, sorry.
I guess expand a little bit. I mean, there's for this facility, there's monitoring that goes on at that facility. DES also operates air pollution monitoring equipment around the state. I'm not sure where the nearest might be to your location that don't monitor specific facilities per se, but just ambient air in general. And then also when we are evaluating whether or not to issue permits to facilities, this is the best room in the building. It's set up supposedly for the.
What's been saying about, you know.
They think they could.
We can hear you.
You can hear us. Great. Thank you.
Great,
Thank
thanks.
you.
We're switching computers, people, so hopefully we won't get disconnected again. We have to change the camera settings.
That's strategy. Cut the budgets, then you say, well, you can't.
Don't know that answer because I think it never flies.
Hey, Lisa,
Yeah.
can you get the settings right on here? So
I'm trying to find the way to swap the camera. Integrated.
Start.
There we go. Got it.
okay. Yay.
Very good.
Okay. So,
John Swann, you got your hand raised. You want to unmute yourself and?
We were in the middle of addressing this other question first.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
I did have one more follow-up question, if I may.
Get settled. Let us know when you're ready.
Yeah, actually, we need to fix the sound here. Sorry.
Okay.
One more minute, please.
you're gonna have to use your thing because
Oh.
there's no other port to plug in another USB.
Okay, how do I get it to the snowball?
Should I already put it on the snowball?
Yeah, it says. Okay, so what's number? Mr. Spargo, do you want to unmute yourself and make sure we can hear you?
Again, we apologize for some technical issues here at the offices and, but Mr. Spargo had questions about, location of monitoring. So, was there anything else you wanted to say before we try to address that?
Yes, I just have,
No, just, stating the
Okay.
obvious that we can definitely smell the burn off and,
Hold on just one moment. I can't hear you.
Yeah.
okay. Can you hear me? Do I just talk louder?
Sorry, we're having audio issues.
Okay. The question, just the statement, I guess, not really a question,
So-
the statement, with it is just that,
Where your cursor is?
He's still saying, it's not saying the snowball.
There you go, Samsung.
You want the Samsung?
Try it now, please.
Okay, Mr. Spargo, could you speak again?
hi there, can you hear me?
Ah,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
now we can.
Great. No follow-up question with it, just a statement
Done it
that,
3 times.
Yeah.
we can definitely smell the burn off of the gases and there's just the general concern of what chemicals, including methane, might be included in the burn off.
Thank you. Mr. Swann,
Swann.
you have your hand raised again?
yes, thank you. Just one last follow-up. My question is, as I understand it, the Turnkey landfill is subject to a groundwater release detection permit due to groundwater monitoring well exceedances for ambient groundwater quality standards for PFAS contaminants. And I'm just wondering, how can the Air Division determine that exceedance is not occurring, and which would be in violation of RSA 125 C10 requirements for air emissions for PFAS substances impacting soil and water, if air quality testing has not been conducted at the site by the DES Air Division? Thank you.
I think along those lines, I'm not sure if it would be air testing. I think it's to be determined how that law will be implemented to determine whether and when there is a caused exceedance. And so I would say stay tuned for the rulemaking to establish the standards and procedures for that analysis. It does not exist yet. So it's not part of this permitting action for sure.
Right, but if the landfill is subject to a groundwater release detection permit for exceedances of groundwater quality standards for PFAS, but you're not testing the air in the air permit, then isn't that a violation of RSA 125C10, which is a requirement since there is exceedances and you don't know yet that you haven't determined, you haven't ruled out the air emissions for PFAS from the facility? I guess that's the point. Thank you.
So we'll take that question under consideration, and try to address it, separate from this hearing. Like question for you. Yes, Swann.
No.
I mean, I'm sorry.
One final question.
Yes.
This has to do with fugitive emissions, and over the years, I've seen a widespread in terms of data from landfills about capture efficiency, running from around 60% up to into the 90s. And I know you can calculate and extrapolate what your gross volume is, production of gas per year, what's going to engines, flares, or being piped to UNH. And that I presume would be based on the amount of waste and the percentage of organic matter that you're estimating. But does DES actually have a way to calculate the capture efficiency at this facility? Do you have a rough number? In other words, how much of it is effectively being captured and how much of it is part of the fugitive emissions from the site? And then the final on that would be, is there a number for the total gross volume per year generated by that facility? I presume would be on the billions, but perhaps more in terms of cubic yards.
I mean, we know how much landfill gas is collected because we know how much is being combusted. So that is a known quantity. And then to determine the amount of fugitive emissions, they look at over the landfill, the different types of cover, and each different type of cover has a certain I guess collection efficiency. So a final cap might have 90% cover. Interim cap may have 85. These numbers, I don't know if they're correct, but based on the total footprint of the landfill and the types of cover that they have, then they back calculate the fugitive emissions based on that overall collection efficiency. They do submit that data to us annually. They they present the calculations on square footage of different types of covers, and that's how they determine the fugitive emissions.
Very helpful. And do you have a rough number for total volume per year generated?
Of gas generated? I don't, but we have it. We can provide it.
Thank you.
More questions online?
Questions? So we can go into the testimony portion.
Yep. So then, now at this point, we'll open the hearing to allow interested parties and attendants to provide oral testimony. A reminder that before each person testifies, they must state for the record their name, town, and the name of any party that they represent, if applicable. I will call on those people who have signed up with a yellow card. If you intend to testify, please sign up with a yellow card and bring it forward to Kat over here if you do. And again, then Barbara will follow Barbara go over the procedures for online, if you want to do that quickly.
It's going to be the same procedures. We're just going to have you raise your hand if you want to provide testimony, and we will call you in the order that you raised your hand after all the people in the room have given their testimony. And I will call on people when it's their time.
So again, I'd like to stress that the topic of this hearing is the air permit, the Title V operating permit. And we would ask that you limit your comments to 5 minutes. We'll give you a general reminder there. Also, this is a time for you to comment. It's not a dialogue or question and answer for us. If you have questions, that's something that we can answer simply. We may attempt to, but generally this is for us to hear from the public. Again, it's your testimony. Please try to keep it relevant to the air permit itself, which is the topic of this hearing. So, does anybody have any questions with regards to how we're going to proceed on oral testimony? All right, I will begin with John Tuthill. You just come up to the desk here.
Thank you. My name is John Tuthill. I'm from Ackworth, New Hampshire, and in fact, not intending to testify, but your process in filling out a card, here I am. My concern actually has more to do with the permitting process than it does with this actual application and this draft permit. And I bring this up in light of a recent Air Resources Division permitting decision having to do with the St. Gobain plant in Maryland. I realize this is off topic, but I will be quick. We saw quotes of DES staff, a quote in the media, which I'm going to have to presume was accurate, that ARD did not find that there was any basis or legal authority to deny the permit. And having followed permitting proceedings in New Hampshire for now decades, as a general rule, DES issues permits. I mean, it is what happens here. It's very unusual that a permit is denied. And we have heard today during the question and answer that these applications are reviewed in terms of the existing regulation, in terms of the existing law. And in this case, we're talking about federal law. The public obviously has other concerns than whether or not a permit application is meeting every single standard. One of those concerns is whether or not these standards are health-based. And it is often claimed that they are. However, watching the permitting process in the state as citizens are raising issues about PFAS, about exposure to persistent toxic substances, which we've known about for decades. I think that the regulations and the law have not kept up. We know how it works in state houses. We know how it works in the US Congress. To say that the standards are health-based, I don't think gives you a complete picture of what's going on here. And I think DES has a responsibility under their mandate to really be putting public health first. And I think this is why cumulative impact has become such an important issue. EPA has now recognized this, and I think that the agency itself is going to need to do much more in terms of leading that conversation in the political realm. Not simply going over to the State House, testifying on bills. Sort of the popular phrase is our hands are tied. Well, actually, your hands are not tied. The agency has broad discretion, broad authority, but it also has a responsibility to be providing some political leadership through the executive branch. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. Next, we'd like to hear from Janet Ward.
Good morning. Like John, I'm Janet Ward from Conchucook, New Hampshire. I'm a member of the group that requested this gathering. And I had intended just to say a few words, but like John, I asked myself, why are we here today? And the press release that you're familiar with said that in the response to the request for this meeting, Director Wright said, there are currently no regulatory requirements to assess cumulative impacts, and such an assessment, and I quote, is an immaterial issue for this permitting action, end of quotation. With regard to mitigating both the production and release of landfill gases, Director Wright said, and I quote, the criteria for issuing a Title V operating permit are based solely on the laws and rules that currently apply to such operations, end of quotations. And citizens, again, a direct quotation, citizens' general concerns are not relevant in the scope of a specific air permit proceedings. And So I asked myself, why am I here? Why are we all here? And it seems to me that it is inappropriate to say, as John did, that citizens' general concerns are not relevant. What is the point of having a Department of Environmental Services if the health of our citizens in the state of New Hampshire don't rank absolutely as a #1 priority? And again, I'm very concerned that the department so frequently simply rubber stamps applications by industry. And I believe the department can do much, much better. And I know the purpose of this meeting is to receive comments. And so this is my comment. I think that the Department of Environmental Services needs to do what John suggested and what I sincerely believe is the case. This department has the knowledge and the capacity to be a leader in what is the morally correct, responsible, appropriate thing to do, rather than just acquiescing to what individuals in the legislature or the executive office may think is, forgive me, politically appropriate or easier to do. So I would ask that as a result of this hearing, not only the turnkey facility approval is reconsidered, but also the purpose of DES as a department is reconsidered. And I sincerely believe that it is possible that going forward, that DES can be what hopefully the department was intended to be at the outset, which is a protector of the health of the citizens of this state. And if I may, an overall goal of the department, having been in attendance at a previous DES meeting, seemed to me to be a reduction of waste so that in the state, so that expansions of places like Turnkey would be less relevant. And I don't see the same amount of attention, energy, and expertise which you all have. I don't see it being brought to waste reduction. So as a citizen, a taxpayer, and someone who really, really cares about our beautiful state, I ask you, please, think about these things. Of course, we're concerned about the expansion of Turnkey, but the larger picture to me is even more important at this point in time. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Next, I'd like to hear from Amelia Sargent. Is that Amelia? Is that correct?
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I am Amelia Cornelia Sargent from Claremont, New Hampshire. Thank you, first of all, very much for holding this hearing requested by citizens. I too had hoped not to testify. I'm not medically trained. I'm not scientifically trained. But I care passionately about our state. And DES, I believe you have far more authority than you currently choose to exercise. Regulatory, statutory, administrative capacities. I'm not an attorney. I do have a law degree. I mediated for the courts for 15 years. I still serve on the agricultural mediation lawsuit for the state, for the USDA. You have far more capacity than you currently choose to exercise. And I beseech each one of you to examine your own conscience, to look within.
What master are you serving? Whom do you serve? And how do you explain to your children the state of our state, of the planet, and of our climate right now? Methane gas is one of the primary, in my understanding, I'm no expert, one of the primary releases from landfills. It's not the only release. PFAS and many others that are known to be contaminants. How long will it take you to come up to speed with a known severe hazard? PFAS. You need to lead for us. You need to represent the people and the citizens of New Hampshire, or we're left with no other choice than to take this into our own hands. The citizens of Seabrook voted twice, I believe, Democratic vote against allowing public service company of New Hampshire to come into that town. And as a last resort, we went to civil disobedience after all the statutory remedies were exhausted. You are here to do a job for the citizens of New Hampshire. And it's imperative that you take leadership to the full extent of your statutory administrative capacities. You have a great deal more power than you are led to believe, I believe. And you can be creative within your job. You have options. And ultimately, whom do you serve? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, I'd like to hear from Representative Tony Kaplan.
Hi there, Tony Kaplan from Towns of Henniker. Also represent Bradford and Warren. So like the other people here today, I'd just like to convey, basically I'd like to convey my sense of frustration as a signatory to this hearing at what I believe is a perceived lack of responsibility on the part of the department carrying out statutory duty to protect the public interest of the people of this state. There's a perception that the department is basically carrying out the will of private companies as opposed to its statutory duty to protect public interest. And so in light of that, I'd just like to read into the record the rules that govern the permitting process for the Title V hearing. Because I believe that there's a wide gap between the statutory requirements and the way that the way that the process is carried out. So this is Environment A 609, it's the criteria for permit renewal. And it says the department shall determine permit conditions under which the Title V operating permit shall be renewed based on all definitions and requirements of Environment A 100 et sec and the Act, and 2, the owner or operator's compliance status with the conditions of the existing permit, and again, all applicable requirements of Environment A 100. So the number one is the meeting of the definitions and requirements of Environment A 100. And secondary is the owner or operator's compliance status with the conditions of the permit. So let's look at Environment A 101. And it clearly says the purpose of the proceeding is to A, promote the public health, welfare, and safety, and B, prevent injury or detriment to human, plant, and animal life, physical property, and other resources. And under other resources, I would like to think that we could include environmental systems and planetary systems that we all depend on, such as the atmosphere, to survive. Which brings up our concern with fugitive emissions. And I just think it's absolutely appalling and unacceptable that in the response to our request for hearing, those concerns were dismissed pretty callously and I believe erroneously. And so that's really what I'm here to say is like the other people who've spoken before me, we need to address that gap between your statutory duties and the way the process seems to be carried out, which is, you know, whether or not the Title V permit goes forward, that's not for me to determine. Obviously, that's for your department, for your resource council to determine. But there seems to be a callous disregard for the public input and the public benefit in this hearing. So that's what I want to say. But we need to, as a public, as a private citizen and as a state representative, I just find that unacceptable. So.
Thank you very much. Katie LaJoy.
Good afternoon. My name is Katie LaJoy. I live in Charlestown. I'm a nurse. Following the release of the draft Title V permit, I joined 11 others in signing a letter to Air Resources Division Director Craig Wright to request this hearing. And we told Mr. Wright that we need a robust assessment of cumulative impacts on the climate and on air quality. And we all, as Tony just said, we also stated DES has a statutory obligation and authority to advocate for options that can mitigate both the production and release of landfill gases. And we mentioned that a ban on landfill and organic material is a good first step. In his response, and a couple of people have already mentioned this, Director Wright did grant the hearing, but he said, again, there's no requirements to assess cumulative impacts, and such an assessment is immaterial. With regard to mitigating the production and release of gases, Mr. Wright said that the criteria for issuing the permit are based solely on the laws and rules that currently apply. And again, that our general concerns are not relevant to the scope of this hearing. That response is problematic and unacceptable. It's unreasonable for the Air Resources Division to ignore cumulative impacts. The fact that the division does not have to assess these impacts does not preclude the division from doing so. States can be more stringent than what the federal law requires. DES has been cognizant of why assessment of cumulative impacts is important. It is unacceptable for the division to say such an assessment is irrelevant. I know that for about 3 decades, we've been talking with DES about persistent toxic substances and cumulative impacts. And we need to get better at this, assessing for these impacts. It's also counterintuitive to say that organics in the landfill are not relevant to the Title V permit, since it's these organics that are generating the methane. The draft permit mentions methane 32 times and details how to measure, capture, and combust this pollutant, but we're interested in mitigating its production. On August 31st, those of us who requested the hearing emailed a statement to DES asking what steps will the division take to assess cumulative impacts at the site and to mitigate methane production there. The statement provides documentation that explains why this is important. It also provides questions and comments specific to landfill operations, including a solid waste permit requirement of a minimum 30% waste diversion rate. Interested if this is happening. In closing, we remind DES of its statutory obligation and authority under RSA 125 to achieve and maintain a reasonable degree of purity of the air resources of the state so as to promote public health, welfare, safety, and prevent injury and detriment to humans, plant, and animal life. We assert the draft Title V permit does not do this, and we therefore support the zero waste hierarchy as the smartest path forward. We need to aggressively conserve, recycle, compost in order to move away from our present disposal-based system. I submit to the public record today a hard copy of the statement that we emailed the other day, along with supporting documentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your comments. Next, I would like to hear from Jim Pontoy.
Jim Contoy, Claremont, New Hampshire. I'm a member of Working on Waste. I'm a member of A Better Claremont. I'm the Ward 2 City Councilor. I do not speak for the City Council. I'm here as a concerned citizen. In his 25 July 2023 letter, ARD Director Craig Wright stated that the request for a hearing from 12 New Hampshire residents does not meet the requirements to grant a hearing. Yet here we are, despite the hearing requirements denial letter. When did we, the people, become a not relevant citizen's concern? The question here is about landfill emissions. In a citizen's press release, John Tuttle stated that ARD's response is unacceptable. Time and time again, ARD and NHDES block progress in protecting public health and the environment. For example, St. Gobain, NCES landfill in Bethlehem, Kinsella and Dalton. New Hampshire does not need to be New England's garbage dump, and pollution does not need to be acceptable. Who among you is not a father, a mother, a daughter, a son, a grandparent, a husband, a wife, a life partner? Please protect our environment for their future. Start saying no to pollution and the direct correlation to the drastic climate crisis. This process has been very professionally run and everyone is polite, but we need to remember that people are dying and the planet is burning up due to the climate crisis, which will be exacerbated by this permit. What will you do? Thank you.
Thank you. Next, and I believe this is the last yellow card I have for here, but we have some hands raised online, but so I would call Bonnie Christie.
I'm Bonnie Christie. I live in Hopkinton. I wasn't necessarily planning to speak today, but as I sat here, I started writing. Boy, do you think I can get through this? Can anybody read this? Can I read it? I'm here as a layperson. I'm not part of WOW or any other groups. I'm the chair of the Hopkinton Waste Reduction Committee, so I'm working diligently on waste reduction in all its aspects, so pretty familiar with the challenges. I didn't coordinate with anybody else before I came here today. I didn't hear what they were going to say, but it really strikes me hearing the commonalities. I mean, many of the things that I'm going to say have already been touched on by others, and I'll try not to be repetitive, but as I said, we're working hard on diversion in Hopkinton at our transfer station. We're trying to beef up our pay-as-you-throw program. We're working on composting food scraps because of the methane issue. We're working a lot. I work personally a lot with DES, Director Wimsat, Mike Nork, Paige Wilson, and Anthony Druin, who's helping us with our PFAS cleanup and our septage lagoons. So I'm familiar with DES and have great respect for all of what you do, and I've been in your shoes before. Another thing that we've done is follow the solid waste working group pretty closely. And you all know that last fall, there was the 2022 New Hampshire Solid Waste Management Plan that came out from that group. And I've paid a lot of attention to that. And I have to say that it gets confusing because on one DES hand, you have setting of pretty aggressive goals for waste reduction. 25% by 2030 and 45% by 2050. That's pretty big goal. And on the other DES hand, you have, paving the road towards accumulating more and more waste. So it seems like this is happening. And we know that 50%, close to 50% of that waste is coming from out of state. We don't have any control on that. So all we can do is try to do what we can here on the ground. So it gets frustrating for me personally, and for those of us who are working on waste reduction, that the process and the overall management of waste is fragmented and broken up sequentially into all these little permits, and they're supposed to not have anything to do with each other. It's permit by permit, hearing by hearing. You can only stay in the lane of that permit and that hearing, and I understand how that works through regulation and laws. But it seems to disconnect the whole process from the reality of what's happening. So, everybody else has mentioned the topic of cumulative impacts, and I'm mentioning it too. It seems like DES is edging its way around the topic of cumulative impacts. Like, we can't measure them. We have no mechanism for this process. We have no way to consider cumulative impacts. But ironically, we're sitting here today talking about, if I understand it correctly, Turnkey 3, and you have Turnkey 1 and Turnkey 2, which certainly are evidence of cumulative impacts. The accumulation of all this, now we're moving into Turnkey 3. So I guess I just wanted to emphasize that it seems like the process is upside down and backwards and can't serve two masters. You're either going to reduce waste and reach these goals, or you're going to make it possible to just indefinitely continue to accept more and more waste, which sends a mixed message to those of us on the ground. So how do those of us on the front lines of trying to manage our own waste in our own towns have confidence that our work isn't just for nothing? And the connection between climate change and waste has been brought up a few times here, and that is huge for me. I just had my first grandchild born in December, which is wonderful. But it does bring into focus what's happening, not to mention my own discomfort with heat and rain and all that. I have to say I'm feeling discouraged, and we need your help. So the fundamental problem of fragmenting the process permit by permit, I would urge DES to somehow, maybe it has to come through regulation, maybe it has to come through statute, but somehow have a modified process that has some way of recognizing comprehensive and cumulative impacts so that we see the big picture of what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that concludes all the testimony we have here in the room. Barbara, you have some hands raised.
Few people that raise their hands. First up is Jackie Elliott.
Again, I would remind you to just state your name and your town and affiliation, if any, and also try to limit your remarks to 5 minutes as possible. Thank you.
Jackie Elliott, Waterboro, Maine. Native granite stater, transplanted to Maine for 13 years now. I just want to make a general comment. at this point about the gathered wisdom of the public today is so impressive and moving. And it can't be disregarded. It's unacceptable. That word has been tied to a lot of points today. And I would add that it cannot, unacceptable applies to the public's involvement, their concern, their knowledge, and their desire for a better process and better outcomes. The topic of climate disruption has been introduced. The emissions of Turnkey don't stop at the landfill. They don't even stop at the border. Those impacts are global, particularly if you consider the greenhouse gas impacts. We can say generally, licensing, whether it be for the waste or the air component or whatever permit we're looking at for landfills in New Hampshire, Maine, and I think I can stretch it credibly to say anywhere. These permits do not protect public health and the environment, and you've heard that very clearly expressed by the public here today. The gentleman wondering, you know, how far do you measure these impacts? I can smell this stuff at my home. That's real. That's real. Trying to keep the conversation honest, I think we have to acknowledge that what occurs around waste operations in New Hampshire and Maine and the entire region, in fact, is heavily influenced by mega for-profit entities such as Waste Management and Casella. Waste is managed as a commodity, which drives profits and incentivizes ever-increasing amounts of waste, which determines the amount of emissions. This is unsustainable, and any honest discussion will acknowledge that. And in this whole process, the rights of citizens to breathe clean air, drink clean water, live in an environment that is relatively healthy, those rights are sacrificed in the name of economics, and I'll put it a little more bluntly, in the name of profits. To have the Air Resources Division consider these concerns as not relative, immaterial, I'll say it's illogical because of what we know, and I will say it's insulting. This idea that we don't deal with cumulative impacts because we're not prepared to do that, unacceptable, particularly to someone who is dealing with PFAS contaminated water or soil, someone who's being treated for kidney or testicular cancer, or for those who've died from diseases that can be linked to these impacts. And I think we can say that with some surety. It's time to change the laws and the regulations so that we can do better. You've got a statutory outline of what your obligation is. Let's figure out how to do it. I would say that it's well past time that decisions around licensing and what frames policy have to be outlined by assumed harm when the toxics involved are known. And we should be working from the front end on waste management. We've heard talk, we need to reduce. This idea that we're going to deal with things on the back end, we're going to turn it into gas and we're going to do this and that and the other thing with it or whatever. We're doing those things and we're discovering that we've caused harm that is likely in many instances irreversible. How much of that does it take before we wake up? I'm going to make the argument
Ms. Elliott,
I'm wrapping
Ms.
right
Elliott,
up.
you got
I'm
about 5
wrapping
minutes,
right
so
up. Thank you very
another
much.
minute, please. Thank you.
There is no longer an excuse to proceed as we are currently. The evidence is there and it's pretty overwhelming. We have a choice. We can change what we do, and we need to do that. And we must come against the poisoning influences that have gotten us to where we are and hold us to where we are. We need to change the legislative and regulatory environment so that we can do better with our decisions going forward. And thank you for indulging me and letting me finish. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Do you want to pause and deal with that?
Yeah, I got 1 hour of battery life left on my laptop.
Okay. How many more?
We got 2 more people that raised their hand. Cynthia Walter is next.
Yeah. So, okay. Again, Ms. Walters, go ahead and please identify yourself and your town and affiliation.
Yes, thank you. My name, can you hear me?
Yes,
my name is Cynthia Walter, and I have a PhD behind my name because I'm a retired scientist. I'm from Dover. My comments today are not as broad as many of the very thoughtful and valuable and relevant comments, but they serve to illustrate how far DES is from fulfilling what's already on the books. And they call you to take responsibility that you, in legislative capacity and regulatory authority that you have. And I do this with the greatest respect for you all as environmental professionals. So here's my 3-minute talk. I'm a scientist with a 35-year career in teaching and research focused on pollution tracking and abatement. I urge you to deny the turnkey expansion. I will send a letter with several reasons associated with the expansion itself. Today, I want to talk about the flares, 3 flares DES approved in the 2020 permit that still appear to be present in the expansion amendment. With the proposed expansion, these flares will process even more landfill gas. All 3 flares are old, 20, 21, and 38 years old. Only 1 flare is ultra low. The other 2 flares from 95 and 2003 are unassisted and unenclosed. This is the cheapest and most polluting type of flare available, as noted in an EPA primer on landfill gas that was recommended by you, the DES. For decades, these flares have been ineffective in removing carcinogens and other hazardous chemicals from landfill gas. To make things worse, this kind of flare actually generates more carcinogens, for example, benzene and acetaldehyde. I have independent research to verify these facts. The proposed permit does not comply with DES' own regulations on regulated air toxic pollutants, your RTAPs. That's a great list, by the way, if you could only abide by the list and its accompanying regulations. For example, the turnkey permit states that RTAPs shall not exceed 24-hour or annual limits, but the permit does not provide adequate means for DES to verify emissions from the flares, especially these poor quality flares. Testing only some equipment 120 days after installation and then every 1 to 3 years cannot protect people and fails to meet DES regulations. By the way, the updated ones we just heard about from Ms. Rydell, those are just annual testing now. So the federal regulations haven't even updated to meet these rules. Right now, DES has no idea of the types and amounts of hazardous chemicals that people living near Turnkey are breathing, and perhaps people beyond that, as we heard from the earlier commentator. Toxics in air are transferred right into our lungs and bloodstream with every breath. This is why your job in the DES permit division, air permit division, is so critical to our health. You have moral and legal obligations to protect people around this landfill. Your job is not to protect Turnkey profits. In sum, these flares at Turnkey are old, cheap, and dangerous. Also, the 2020 permit and amendments are inadequate to meet the standards in your own current regulations. I urge you to deny the expansion permit. The original landfill permit lasts until 25. Before renewal permit, Turnkey must install at least low, ultra low, and closed flaring and more meaningful monitoring for RTAPs, including PFAS. This is the best available technology you can require and what we deserve. As a quick side, I was astounded to hear that you are walking around with samples that are FID, and you choose only to measure the methane because that's all the EPA required you to do. And yet your own RTAP list has a huge number of compounds that you know you could test. College students, my college students could measure the FID with FIDs, the other compounds, but you've chosen not to. Please don't stay in that narrow lane. You have more power and more capacity than you are exercising. So to conclude, as environmental professionals, you chose to serve the state and protect people. You could have gotten more high salary jobs in the industry, but you chose to be here in this table at this room with us. Please, our health depends on your decisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And we have next is Susan Richmond.
Ms. Richmond? If you're muted, we can't hear you.
I think you're self-muted. So go up to the top of your toolbar. You'll see a little microphone and click on.
There we go.
There you go.
Thanks so much. I'm Susan Richmond. I live in Durham. I am on our town's Citizen Solid Waste Advisory Committee, and I'm in general concerned about the environmental future of life on this planet. I'd like to, first of all, state, please consider me as one of the signatories of the statement that you received, which I hadn't known about at the time, but I totally endorse it. And I think, in agreement with everything I heard today, and would like to emphasize what Representative Kaplan and others have said, that your mandate is protecting the health of life in this state. And what the EPA mandates for you is your jumping off point. It's the narrow requirement of what you do at the least, but you are capable of generating standards higher than that. And New Hampshire certainly has great resources in terms of people with medical and scientific expertise who can advise what are the levels that are safe or not safe for humans. Whatever goes into the air does not stay put, it travels. So if you are testing right there at the Turnkey site, you're not measuring what is in surrounding communities, how far it travels, how it adds to fumes from the gas station down the street, what might be in the water. And very interestingly, in discussions that Cynthia Walter, who spoke before me, had concerning advanced recycling this year in the legislature, you participated in agreeing that cumulative effects should be studied. And then finally, that did not come to be because the Finance Committee said, oh, that will cost us money. So it seems to me you yourselves, your personnel, your scientists have agreed cumulative impacts are a concern, just they weren't in your budget at the moment. But I think that the cost of all the people whose health is being ruined and the potential of life on our planet, those are costs too, and those need to be entered into the configuration. So thank you very much for giving me this time, and please consider the big picture of health in New Hampshire and the lawsuits and the health risks that we don't want to encourage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Barbara, do we have anybody else?
Nope, I assume, Cynthia, you still have your hand raised, that you don't want to talk anymore.
All right.
Yep, okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
We got another one, John Swann.
Yes, Mr. Swann, go ahead.
Yes, just real quickly, I wanted to inquire as to whether or not there will be a compilation of comments in the hearing record. Thank you.
So, yes, all written comments will be collected in the record, available for public review. And then there will be a recording of this hearing that's in our records. And I believe we're also intend to post it on the website.
All right. We all set?
Yep.
So thank you very much, everyone, for participating. And so this concludes the testimony portion of today's hearing. We thank you for taking the time to participate. I'd like to offer a couple of notes before we officially close the hearing.
Before you, can I add one quick note?
Sure.
I know that several people, I'm not sure if any of them are online right now, have submitted email comments to us within the last few days. Rest assured, the comment period is open. I think Mike will explain when that's open until, but those emails and anything that you submitted to us will be considered as a comment and considered in the decision and included in the record. Even though it may not have been acknowledged today at this hearing.
Thanks, Todd. So as we mentioned earlier, the deadline for public comments will be 4 p.m. close of business on Wednesday, September 13th, 1 week for today. So if there's something else that you felt was important or you wanted to get something in writing, you can still get it to us until 1 week from today.
Thank you for extending that beyond today's hearing. Very grateful for that.
Just to reiterate on our process moving forward, once the public comment period is closed, DES has 30 days to review all the comments received and issue a final decision. All those who provided contact information at today's hearing and those who submitted written comments will be provided with a copy of our final decision via email, and it will also be available on our website. This concludes today's hearing. Again, thank you all for your time. The hearing is concluded. I would just like to take one moment to address two particular issues that have been raised. Now, again, the hearing is formally closed, but as was mentioned, there was legislation last year relative to authorizing DES to address to do a report on cumulative impacts and make some recommendations as for legislation. As was noted, that bill was retained and ultimately, I believe, was ITL voted in its meeting to legislate in the House. DES did indicate that we supported the requirement to study the issue and provide some input. So I would also note that you may have seen some public information recently. A number of commenters addressed climate change, and although we don't have current authority to specifically address climate change, we have just recently received a $3 million grant from EPA that requires us to prepare two documents: the Priority Climate Action Plan, which is due next March 1st. And then a comprehensive climate action plan, which is due 2 years following that. Those will both be there'll be public processes related to those. There'll be stakeholder and input opportunities. The timeline, again, these are EPA grants, and the timelines are dictated under the Inflation Reduction Act, and they're extraordinarily tight. We do intend to implement those and produce the required documents and analyses. So I just wanted to note that for those of you who are interested in climate change, that that would be an opportunity to raise your concerns and thoughts to the department for inclusion in those reports. So
You got a,
thank you. Yes.
Sure.
Yes.
so that EPA report, the first one is due in March.
March 1st of 2024.
And will there be a public draft of that available?
Yes, there'll be public stakeholder processes. There'll be information on our website, and we'll be reaching out to a number of stakeholders or stakeholder organizations that we've identified. It'll be our starting point will be the 2009 climate plan that was produced by Governor Lynch's commission back in that time frame. And again, the time frame that EPA has given us is completely untenable. These grants were announced back in April. We received the award August 23rd, and we're expected to produce this first preliminary climate plan by March 1st. And that requirement is in order for any entity in the New Hampshire to be able to apply for follow-on Inflation Reduction Act funding of $4.6 billion that's available nationally. That'll be available April 1st, I believe. But we have to have, if we don't have the priority climate action plan in place.
Shot that down in the legislature.
What's that?
We could have had an earlier start on it if we hadn't shot that down.
Yes, again, there was climate legislation in the legislature, as there has been for a number of years. It's not my intent to draw a target on that, but certainly we recognize the need, and we intend to fulfill the requirements of this Inflation Reduction Act grant as best we possibly can in the time frame that we're allowed. So I just wanted to give you all some notice of that, and thank you all for coming. Appreciate it, and staff will be available if you have any questions or anything. We'll try to address some questions if possible. But